Walk into a frontier saloon today, or what's left of one, and you'll smell sawdust and old wood. But walk into that same saloon in 1875, and you'd smell something else entirely. Laudanum on a gambler's breath, opium smoke drifting from a back room, and cocaine dissolving into a glass of red wine at the bar. For 150 years, the Wild West has been sold to us as whiskey, six-shooters, and cigarettes. But that's only half the story. Behind the saloon doors and inside the drugstores of every cowtown from Dodge City to Tombstone, an entire pharmacy of narcotics was sitting in plain sight, legal and unregulated. Using AI-reconstructed imagery built from period photographs and newspaper ads, we're about to show you what the real drug culture of the Wild West looked like. But to understand how deep it went, we have to go back before a single cowboy ever rode west, to a battlefield. The year is 1865. The Civil War has just ended, and thousands of veterans are heading west, carrying more than a revolver. During the war, the Union Army alone issued nearly 10 million opium pills and almost 3 million ounces of opium tinctures to wounded soldiers. Nobody thought twice about it, but that decision would follow these men for the rest of their lives. The men don't know it yet, but the same drug that numbed their battlefield wounds is about to numb an entire frontier. Pharmacists in cowtowns sell morphine over the counter, no prescription required. A veteran with a war wound walks into a Tombstone drugstore in 1880 and walks out with exactly what he needs, completely legally. This isn't a footnote. This is the seed of a drug culture that will define the entire frontier era. But the soldiers aren't the only ones carrying opium west. Chinese laborers brought their own habits with them during the California Gold Rush and the building of the Transcontinental Railroad. From about 1850 to 1870, opium smoking stayed mostly within Chinese communities. But in the 1870s, something shifts. White miners, gamblers, and cowboys start showing up at the same doors. Nobody in those back rooms knows it yet, but within 40 years, opium will be illegal nationwide. By the 1880s, towns like Deadwood and Tombstone had opium dens running openly, sometimes just a few doors from the sheriff's office. The law looks the other way. Business is business. But the opium dens are nothing compared to what's sitting on the shelf of every general store in the West. Laudanum. It's opium dissolved in alcohol, sold without restriction, and doctors call it the aspirin of the 19th century, because it's prescribed for everything: teething babies, cramps, coughs, dysentery, a bad mood. Even the men who built the country weren't immune. Benjamin Franklin took opium for pain late in life. A doctor gave Alexander Hamilton laudanum after his fatal duel with Aaron Burr, decades before a single wagon train headed west. A mother in a sod house in Kansas gives her crying infant a spoonful of soothing syrup, with no idea she's dosing the child with morphine. Nothing on the label warns her. That's not the exception in 1875. That's standard medicine. But the strangest chapter of frontier pharmacology doesn't come from the East at all. It comes from a coca leaf grown at 6,000 feet in the Andes. In 1859, a German chemist isolated cocaine from that leaf for the first time. Nobody thinks it's dangerous yet. Within 20 years, it's the most fashionable drug in America. By the mid-1880s, you could walk into nearly any drugstore and buy cocaine in 15 different forms: powder, cigarettes, lozenges, even injectable solutions. Doctors prescribe it for indigestion, melancholia, pain, and even to relieve vomiting during pregnancy. The Frontier's favorite version comes in a wine bottle. A French chemist named Angelo Mariani blends Bordeaux wine with coca leaves into something called Vin Mariani, about 6 milligrams of cocaine per ounce, from a compound nobody yet considered addictive. It's a sensation. Nobody knows it yet, but within 2 decades, cocaine will be banned nearly everywhere in the country. Even a dying Ulysses S. Grant reportedly sips it while writing his memoirs in 1885. But then an Atlanta pharmacist named John Pemberton copies the formula, though his version carries even more cocaine. Local prohibition laws force him to pull the alcohol out a year later, so he swaps in carbonated water instead. He calls it Coca-Cola. Every bottle on a Frontier shelf carries real cocaine, and it stays that way for decades. By the late 1880s, the line between medicine cabinet and saloon had basically disappeared. Cowboys off a cattle drive, miners up from underground, gamblers awake for a 40-hour poker game. They all reach for the same tonic their doctor prescribed for a headache. Nobody calls it addiction yet. They call it a pick-me-up. But underneath all of it sits the one drug that never needed a chemist, a patent, or a doctor's signature: whiskey. Rot gut, pop skull, tarantula juice, cut with everything from tobacco to gunpowder, poured by the gallon in every saloon between the Mississippi and the Pacific. It's the one substance the entire West agrees on, but not the only one already there before the West existed. But far beyond the cowtowns, in territory the railroad hasn't reached yet. Something older than all of it is already in use. Native nations have practiced ceremonial use of peyote for centuries, long before a single saloon stood on land that once belonged to them. It isn't a vice, and it isn't a frontier drug. It comes from a different relationship with the land, one that the boomtowns mostly ignored or tried to erase. 150 years, 1,000 boomtowns, one frontier running on substances we'd now call a public health crisis. From morphine-soaked bandages on a Civil War battlefield to cocaine in a Coca-Cola bottle, the Wild West wasn't built on grit alone. It was built on a medicine cabinet with no rules. If you grew up on Westerns, you pictured the cowboy with nothing but a 6-shooter and a shot of whiskey. If this is the first time you're hearing this, now you know the other half of the story. Through the wars, the railroads, and the boomtowns that rose and burned and rose again, that medicine cabinet shaped the people who built the West,